Joining us now is former New York City Judge George Grasso. He's also a 30-year veteran of the NYPD. Suzanne Craig, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist with the New York Times, who has spent years covering Donald Trump, his businesses, his brand, was also in the courtroom today. And back with us now, our legal panel, Chuck Rosenberg, Catherine Christian, and Charles Coleman. Good to see all of you. So, Judge Grasso, let me start with you. Your initial takeaways, having been in the court listening to today's final proceedings in this case.
Well, anyone who was in the courtroom was a personal witness to history. I think that Judge Merchan basically gave the country a master class on what a judge being faced with such an unprecedented situation as Judge Merchan was faced with should do, both to balance the rule of law, respect the jury, respect the rights of an individual defendant, and probably most important, given the unique circumstances in this case, respect the United States of America and everyone who voted in the past election. So what he did is he imposed a sentence that, as was said at the outset of this particular take, that now locks in the jury, backs the jury. Donald Trump is now officially a convicted felon, convicted of 34 felony counts. And it's very important for the rule of law, and I said through every day of the trial, there was abundant evidence for that to stand. But on the other hand, we have the defendant in this case, with all of this information out there available for the public to see, that won the election to be our next president, become president again. He won the election fair and square. And that was pointed out as well by the judge and acknowledged by the district attorney. So now on January 20th, the judge has to be very careful that he doesn't take any action that could in any way encumber Donald Trump's ability to be president again, this time president number 47. And he was very clear and precise in saying his decision with an unconditional discharge wasn't because Donald Trump's actions as an individual was mitigated, but he was acknowledging the rights of the United States of America, all of the citizens in this country, including you, including me, to have a president that is unencumbered by an ongoing criminal process. Yeah. So he did the right thing for the country. He did the right thing for the defendant, and he did the right thing for the rule of law and backed and respected the jury. Those are my views.
And Sue, I know that you were in the courtroom as well. What do you see as Judge Merchan's statements today, and how focused was he on maybe giving a lesson in certain ways?
I think he really was. I have to say, when I kind of left and was sort of digesting what had happened, I think that the air in the courtroom and the mood was very much one of frustration on every side. It started out with the lawyer from the Manhattan DA's office, Josh Steinglass, got up, and he agreed that the unconditional discharge made sense, but then kind of went into his closing arguments about everything that had happened in the trial and the wrongs that had led to the guilty verdict and the frustration there. And then Donald Trump and his lawyers got up, and Donald Trump gave a very weaving speech about how unjust it was and how, I don't know, he talked again about how he won the popular vote. It was sort of all over the place. But then returning to the judge, I think he really had thought out what he wanted to say, and he had, at that point, he had all of us there. He had an audience for it. And he actually started out with something that I thought really resonated with me, which he talked about how extraordinary this situation was. But then he talked about how when the trial started and how when the process started, how it became so ordinary, and how once the opening argument started, even the jury selection, it was like anybody else going through a trial, and they had, just the process worked and the verdict happened. And then I think he was left with a really awful situation that he has struggled with. He said he thought a lot about it. He says every time he has to come up and he has to decide what the punishment is going to be, whether it's a minor offense or a sex trafficker or somebody who's committed murder. He's had them all through his courtroom. It's very serious. But he felt in this situation, he said, Donald Trump, the ordinary citizen, Donald Trump, the criminal defendant, would not be entitled to the protections of the presidency. But he was very clear in his language about distinguishing Donald Trump, the man, from the office of the president that Donald Trump will be assuming in just over a week.
I did think that Judge Merchan was very untheatrical, and that stood out just sort of matter of fact, straight by the book, just going to handle this case like it would be for other clients, or I should say defendants in this case. I wanted to get your reaction, Judge Grasso, to what we heard from Trump, not only in the courtroom, but this sort of victory lap that he's taking now after the sentencing, really honing in on the unconditional discharge, writing in that statement, which is all we have after the court so far. I was given an unconditional discharge. That result alone proves that, as all legal scholars and experts have said, he claims, there is no case, there was never a case, and this whole scam fully deserves to be dismissed.
Total BS. But BS, total BS that, as Susan could tell you, she's done the encyclopedia in her book, Lucky Loser, where Donald Trump has been adept. I mean, he's 78 years old, but going back to when he was in his 20s. He can take one disastrous situation after another, and he tries to spin it into a victory. And he just pounds the table harder the more he's in a corner. That's exactly what he's doing now. But speaking as a retired judge for almost 13 years and an attorney for over 40 years, from a legal point of view, everything that he said is BS. What the judge did here is he locked in Donald Trump as a convicted felon, unless and until an appellate court with appropriate jurisdiction, either in New York State or the United States Supreme Court, unless they vacate this, Donald Trump is a convicted felon. That sentence of unconditional discharge locked that in. Judge Merchan knew exactly what he was doing, and he did it. And Donald Trump, by the way, knew exactly what he was saying, and he said it. And by the way, speaking legally, this stuff, it's ridiculous, but he clearly knows what he's doing because he's going to become our 47th president, notwithstanding, one trial, one catastrophe after another. But this is the way Trump handles things, so it was totally to be expected.